Hello, everybody, and a huge thank you to joining us today for this panel. It's a Lead Dev online panel discussion created in partnership with Storyblock. The discussion will last about 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the Lead Dev Slack to answer some of your questions in hashtag panel Q&A, the channel. For those of us joining live, I've dropped a link to that Slack in your chat. It's just a really great community of engineering leaders supporting and learning from each other. We do have time to answer questions live, and I think this is a hot button topic for a lot of people trying to figure out what's going on in the world we are living in right now, or in the industry we're working in. So I do welcome everyone joining us live. You do have the privilege of asking questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them as we see fit. And if we don't finish, we'll continue in that Slack. So I really hope we have a great session. So a lot of C-suite problematically never knew what engineering was doing. It's kind of wild because CTO is in the C-suite, but it's even more dangerous now when a lot of the senior people at organizations don't know what's happening. And they just think, oh, AI can replace engineers. So at Lead Dev and on this panel, I can assure you that is not the vibe we're going for. We're not trying to replace, we're trying to help. So this conversation hopefully brings a mix of advice for software engineers to understand how to adapt your roles in this tumultuous climate, as well as for engineering leadership to understand how to support your teammates in that adaptation. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Jennifer Riggins, and I'm everyone's favorite technology journalist and host. And today I will be joined by Shalini, Jeremy, and Phil, who are ready to share their experiences with you. So please, can you each introduce yourself? Shalini, if you will go first.
Yes, I'm Shalini Agarwal. I lead the engineering at LinkedIn, focused on careers and jobs and members looking for jobs, as that's what we call seekers. Along with that, I am responsible for AI-powered search, recommendations, and most recently, agentic experience to help our members navigate their careers. I've spent about 2 decades building products and systems at scale, and I'm very excited about this moment right now because we are seeing one of the big shifts, our biggest shifts in software engineering since I would say maybe cloud or mobile. And even though AI can help generate code, review code, even orchestrate parts of our workflows, but that's not just what engineering is about. And that doesn't make engineering less important. I truly believe the engineering value that we create is much more beyond just writing code, and how we define our performance and promotions. We need to be changing that to a certain extent, but that's why we are here to talk about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Phil, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Phil Haycoop. I run the global practice for SDLC here at Valiantis. I had 2 careers. I first spent 10 years in robotics and machine learning, and I got out right as soon as I got hot. The reason no one should actually listen to me is I thought deep learning was a fad. It would never go anywhere, so shows what I know. After that, I spent 10 years in tech, building products, doing product strategy, that kind of thing. So I try and help most of our customers nowadays figure out how does the SDLC change in their organization. And most of it is around fundamentals, to be honest with you. Everybody wants that future agentic thing. I think all of it is an option once you have the fundamentals down. I think that's the theme that comes into this a lot, is like there's a craft, software development, engineering, and productionalizing all of it. And you can't just wave a magic wand and have AI take care of all of it. You have to know what you're asking and having it do. So that's kind of the angle that I come from.
You mean all those best practices we've been talking about for 10 years that so many companies follow?
Among other things, yeah.
Jeremy, please.
Yes, so I'm Jeremy. I'm a Frenchie living in Berlin. I come from the Storyblock side, where I'm leading the front end, building the product Storyblock. I actually started my career more on the backend side of things. Then when I moved to Berlin, I moved more to the front end, did a lot of work on platform engineering and how to enable let's say large teams. And most recently, when I joined Storyblock, really supporting like a kind of like scaling the product in terms of like how we collaborate at scale, and now how AI comes into this mix of like, actually, I really like what already Phil and Shalini were saying, where like this is not something new, but like AI, especially with like our like agentic workflows, will really work when you have like this set of very strong, like let's say already practices as it's like an amplifier. So I'm excited really to talk about that and talk about how can people make the difference with this technology, and what are, let's say, the good tips or mindset to adopt when it comes to it, because it's also creating a lot of strain on engineers right now.
Mhm. Absolutely. So let's start by just talking about the title, because depending on where I emphasize the word, it could be very different. Like, what are engineers getting paid for now? Or what are they getting paid for now? Or what are they even getting paid for? There's a lot of interpretation. So let's talk about like how we're each going to approach this conversation, maybe to set goals. Jeremy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can start. I think also like Shalini mentioned it already, that coding was probably only a small fraction of the whole thing. I think there's two angles that I want to talk about. I think the first one is really like engineering, or like actually putting, let's say software, like let's say into like the hands of people, or like into, let's say, things that will make money or drive your business forward, was actually like a big pipeline of things, right? It starts from like figuring out what is the problem that we're trying to solve. Is the problem even worth solving right now? And this is not something that like that fundamentally changed with AI, right? If anything, I see actually a lot of people like slamming a lot of things, a lot of slop at something that's not even worth solving and it's not worth building, right? So trying to figure out what your customers want, what the stakeholders that you're working with want, it's a big part of the job. And this is where actually we can already throw one of the first tip. I think one of the biggest thing for people like to really try to adopt, let's say, like agent encoding, or like to work in this new era of software, is having this product and this business mindset first, right? It's not about now like crafting and building code. Of course, I think we'll talk about how important the fundamentals are, but it's about reminding yourself that what matters is really building a business outcome, and like the way to do that is actually like to puzzle, like, okay, like what you already know about the business, where you want to go, and how you can use the software for that. So I think, at least on this side, it's like actually like, just to demystify, that's not really where the most value for the top engineers was already. But it's not on coding. It's about translating this, like, okay, we want to do this, we want to be there, and how to do that is actually like the crust of the job. But I think like maybe Shalini can add to that for sure.
Sure, yeah, no, happy to. So even in the past, when you hire a software engineer and they grow, they're not growing because they're faster in coding. They're growing because they can translate the problem that need to be solved and break it down, and really do that problem solving and critical thinking, and use their judgment to say, what is it that we need to really build? And creating that clarity among, if you have to solve a problem, what is it that we are trying to really get towards? And writing code was, yes, big part of the job, but was not the only job. It was understanding the problem, figuring out technical trade-offs, designing those systems that can scale, and then ensuring quality, and of course, trust. And then what Jeremy just said is like shipping the outcomes. Because at the end of the day, there has to be a business problem that you're solving. So it's not so much about what you have built, but it's more about what has changed because you built it. And that was always true. Just that today, there's a lot of things that you're building. But at the end of the day, what outcomes those things that you build are still the most important thing. Just building for the sake of it is not something that was valuable in the past. People were not able to do it because there was a little bit of a friction to get to coding getting done. But now that friction has gone, but the value creation is still the same.
But a lot of developers, the most quantifiable, like they've always had a tangible result to their job. So I think there's a sense of identity tied to that code in a way, because that's the part they could prove they were doing their job. So how does that change when that is effectively not part of their job anymore?
Well, that's the same thing as like lines of code being a metric that you want to measure your engineers by, right? Like it's easy, it's visible, but it's not actually a good measure. And I think that one of the key things to point out, and as Jeremy and Shalini already pointed out, is like you're supposed to do a thing. You're delivering value to customers, whether they're internal or external. And in most cases, I think one of the biggest strengths for engineers right now is the ability to say no. Like, no, we don't build this. No, this isn't how we should go about it. Like, we don't need 13,000 extra lines of code in this module. We don't need to build 15 different features because they just distract from the core value prop of the product, right? Like, this was traditionally what product managers do, and I think they still have a big job here, but it's all about making sure that end to end you're seeing a lot of value there. But where this disrupts it is like where an engineering team, or actually a team of programmers, was order taking from someone else. Like, I think that's where you're seeing the disruption, because they didn't need to manage the context and the customer problem. They didn't have to be experts there. Like, if all you were getting as a black box was I need you to build this CRUD app, and this is what the non-functional and functional requirements of it are, that's disappearing. But to be honest with you, I think most people I talk to are happy, because that was the boring bit. The inciting bit is matching domain knowledge to the craft of engineering and figuring out like, how can I solve an actual meaningful problem? And it's harder to measure, but it's orders of magnitude more impactful.
How do you measure it then? I know it's harder, but is it impossible to measure?
It's not impossible to measure, but you measure it through different things, right? Like, you can measure it by revenue, by customer adoption. Like, you can do cohort-based analysis on features that get adopted and seeing what happens there. Like, you have to think about it less as the engineering part and more as the whole business part. If you think software is the revenue engine of your company, then yeah, measure it as a revenue engine. It may be a little uncomfortable for some engineering managers who've tried to stay away from that, but I think it's where you have to lean in. Like, we drive millions of dollars of revenue, absolutely, then get paid accordingly too, right?
Yeah, I
One
want to
other-
add to that.
Yeah, please,
Sorry, Jennifer.
please.
Just adding to that, I think to Jeremy's point, it was never fun to be told what to do. One of my previous bosses used to call engineers are not just wrench turners. We are co-owners of the problem. And I think today that has become so much more important, because you need to understand the business problem to really solve it the right way. When your product managers tell you, create this table that should do this CRUD operation, you only do that much because that's what you're told. And now, as engineers with AI, you don't need to be told that. Anybody can do it. If you already know that, maybe you are a product manager that can also do engineering. Totally okay with that, like full stack engineers or full cycle engineers are totally okay to have. But if you're really building scalable systems, you need to know what to do beyond that table creation. What is the problem you're really solving? Maybe you need to create the table and put a cache in front of it so that you can meet the member SLA of a few milliseconds to deliver that experience to the member. So knowing the full problem statement was always important, but we were trapped sometimes in this handing off in their silos, throw it over the wall. This is the requirement. You build that and you throw it back over the wall, not knowing what's going to happen. But we always needed to be co-owners and co-builders with our product managers, with the business problem statement, so that we could actually build the right solution. And it just became more and more transparent. And to your question about how do we measure success for engineers? If you're co-owning the business problem, you're actually equally responsible for that business outcome. There's nobody else that is responsible for it, and you're just doing the coding. And I think we have just kind of removed that wall in between, and it actually has become more cohesive and partnership across the board.
Because of AI, you're saying?
Well, AI has removed that barrier. It's not like because of AI. AI just has forced to remove that barrier, because a lot of times eng managers or engineers would hide behind that I am just the coder, just tell me what to do. That barrier is actually has been removed when it was sometimes forced by some eng leaders to remove. Now it is just removed for you. You can't hide behind it.
But then how are nobody's job description's changing. Maybe if a new role is coming up, but we're having a shift that's so much more dramatic. When cloud was adopted and someone within your company moved into cloud or Kubernetes or all these cloud native technologies, it often led to a job title change, more money, and a new job description.
But that was
Companies,
the short term.
yeah,
Sorry.
but what are companies doing now, even in the short term, as the job descriptions are dramatically changing for their existing employees?
Well, there's a bumbling of that too. Like, I think there's like jobs evolve naturally anyway, right? Like the job description you have on day one, I don't think always matches what you're doing day 90 even. But I think there's an overcorrection of people wanting to get ahead of every curve right now. If you have a prompt engineer or context engineering was fancy for a little while, like all that stuff is a great way to say like we're leaning into this and we need someone to really be an expert in this particular piece. But if I look at engineering's organizations right now, every engineer understands DevOps principles. Like you might have an SRE and a DevOps engineer on your cross-functional team, but there's no one that doesn't understand what they're doing there, right? So like some of this just becomes part of the table stakes of what an engineer has to understand and be part of. And I think that the AI component to all this, right? Not just how do I fit this into my loop of writing software, but also just how it fits in, how does it work, what are the limitations, how can I make sure that it is helping me think better and do better as opposed to just offshoring all my thinking, is part of that right now. And some people are just trying to expedite that by making that someone else's full-time job and saying like, you need to focus on this area, learn this really, really deeply, share it with everybody else so that we can again become all like, or for everybody to become somewhat like fluent in that particular space. That's why I think companies would tend to lean into like, I have a Kubernetes engineer, I have a DevOps engineer, like those still exist if they become that important to the org. But I think eventually what you need is everybody has a base level understanding of what those things are so that the expert also can lean on you guys to not have to like bolt on that particular component within the team. It's the same with security, right? Security engineers are great, but if you bring them in at the end of the product cycle, there's no way you can actually get any meaningful results, right? The same with I think applies to both the other pieces, right? You have to have this as a native part of how you do things.
Yeah,
It's
and for me,
still- yeah, go.
No, I do see still a lot of job offers now. I mean, it was also a bit pre-AI about like just a product engineer, right? We've seen the rise of this, right? Like it's basically what we talked earlier about. It's people that just like are able to drive like, let's say, projects really end to end across the stack. And one thing about just purely on job descriptions, I do think like the fundamentals of the job, as we said earlier, they haven't changed, right? Like, for example, you still need people to really understand deeply about front end to not ship like 300 megabytes of JavaScript to a website. You still need like a strong, let's say, database engineer, like maybe like a strong, let's say, like even like backend engineer to really architect well. And I think where there is a shift, and I think it's something that I see like companies adopting very like early very well, is when actually these experts or like these people that have this deep expertise, they start to become more like even more platform. So basically, this was already kind of like the case in many companies, but now especially with agentic coding, if actually this is what we have right now, we are experimenting at Storyblock, where we have the front-end team having very clear guidelines on, okay, this is how we want to ship front-end at Storyblock. This is a set of libraries or patterns what we want to use. And what we start seeing, and actually I'm super happy to see that, is that we have backend engineers now that are like driving a project, and there's a bit of front-end, like just not like a fundamental change, maybe just a change to a table or a new page. And because we have this set of strict guidelines or like rules that have been put in place by the front-end expert team, they are able actually to do that front-end part, then just maybe get it reviewed and shipped. And I think that's where like I think like the jobs are going. You have this set of experts like that can basically enable also others, even like maybe even your product manager is able to add some tracking to your front end because they understand and they know how to plug it in. So I think that's where it gets also interesting, is like the job becomes both broader because you have access to different parts, but also your expertise is still valuable to enable others. So that's, I think for me, that's quite interesting.
But if you
Just to add maybe a tiny bit on the job description piece, I think there was no job description that ever said how many, like the typing speed of your code.
yeah.
We never had that. We never had a job description that you should be writing this many lines of code. Like it was always expertise in certain languages. And in some ways, that expertise, like what Jeremy and Phil said, is becoming a little bit more generic. It's no longer JavaScript versus Java, but there are still instances where you do need the experts to go find that gnarly problem or go find that optimization from a site speed standpoint or connecting the platforms. It's sometimes really hard to solve those things as a journalist. So putting that together, so both the generalist part and the specialist part is important. And the job descriptions are not changing because we still need those experts. Maybe as an early in career, you need to start more generalist and figure out your path to the specialist part, which part speaks to you. And I think one or all of us have moved around in our careers doing back end and maybe front end and other things. And you kind of evolve your expertise based on what is interesting for you, what is the opportunity in front of you as well. But being a generalist in today's day and age is so much more easier. We would have engineers initially, like earlier, even 10 years ago or 5 years ago, oh, I'm hiring an iOS engineer, or I'm hiring Android or a web engineer, even coming right out of college. Now I can actually hire just engineers and then help them get into the expertise over time. Because with all this agentic code and some of the guidelines like what Jeremy shared, every company is figuring that out. For example, like incidents when they happen over the weekends or whatever, I don't have every type of engineer on call. If it's an iOS related issue, I actually have a web engineer go figure that out and fix it with the agent's help. And that's totally fine because you're not writing big pieces of code. You're actually fixing small changes. And that is so much more easier to do now with agentic coding than it was in the past. So in some ways, it's both helping us move faster, but also helping engineers to take more time to find their expertise and their specialization area as they grow into their career.
Okay, let's get more into that because we do have a question from the audience. Thank you, Andrew. Where do junior engineers fit into this new world, and how do we find future senior engineers? And I think we all agree on the call that you can't have senior engineers until you have junior engineers, so it's foolhardy to not. So how do we make sure there is a place for them? What are some tactics, some active tactics?
This is a conversation I've had a couple times now, and I think there's a couple themes there that I think are being successful or successfully being adopted. One is you have to change your expectations of what that onboarding process looks like for a new junior engineer. So yes, you've agreed to hire. We haven't gone all in on the seniors, right? Like your team needs to be ready to adopt a junior engineer. That's kind of always been an interesting dynamic. But right now, one of the things that we're seeing is fundamentally having good knowledge bases and access to tools and processes documented is an incredible win for junior engineers, because they don't just ask the agents to write the code. Like you can ask the agents to explain the code, go through all your ADRs and explain why did we make this decision? Why aren't we using this technology? Like, so you have to change the ratio that you're asking questions versus you're doing implementation for that when it looks to the AI side. I think the other piece that's really important is that the key thing the signal you're looking for with junior engineers is curiosity, right? That's always been the case, I think, for successful junior engineers is like, you're going to drink from the fire hose. You're going to have to learn all kinds of different things. Like, I know we hired you to be a Python dev, but here's some Groovy scripts that need a little help. Like that's normal. Like that's been part of the job since, I don't know, I came out of college. And I think that adaptability has just become like, there's a wider set of stuff that you could look at, but under the hood, it's still we're trying to solve a problem. We have these technical tools at our disposal. Stack Overflow, Wikipedia, Claude, it doesn't matter who you ask, you're going to be asking people. Like I Googled way too much my first couple of years when I was an engineer. I felt guilty about it, but that's still the case. Like your job as a junior really is to learn mostly while also trying to contribute, right? I think that process is fundamentally not changed. It's just how do you culturally integrate that is different, and you have to make sure the team understands what that looks like and gives the right support. But I think fundamentally, like I said, it's you're going to have someone who needs to learn a lot of different things. A lot of things are going to get thrown at them, and they have to be comfortable with that, because no matter how senior you get, that's going to be a constant through your career.
I would just maybe add, like, adding to Phil's point, AI actually raises the floor in some ways, because as a junior person, maybe early in career, as they're coming in the door, with AI and agents, their floor is so much higher than, say, 2 years ago when engineers were coming out of college. And because of all these tools where they don't have to ask, there's so much already available for them to learn and grow. But the fundamental thing that makes somebody from a junior to senior and as they grow is really the same things. Your curiosity, are you open to absorbing every new thing that is in front of you? Your problem solving, critical thinking, and then judgment. And it's really about how much are you willing to have that yourself being open to learning. And to your question about what is the difference between junior and senior and how do we help them grow? The answer is a junior person has to grow much more rapidly because that ceiling is much more higher and the base has increased. So the floor has increased and the ceiling has increased with the judgment. And the judgment is what raises the ceiling, honestly. And it just accelerates the execution. So you can actually get more done as a junior person coming in than we were able to do when we started our careers a decade ago or 2 decades ago.
They hope, yeah.
I just want to add something. Actually, I like this last point, but it's also, I just want to recognize also for maybe like people that start this career or like maybe are like a lot into these tools. You can learn much, much faster, but there is also, it can be also like something to be mindful about that sometimes you're overexposed to so much things, right? Like, I think like one thing I see also is like engineers now trying to push maybe twice as much or 3 times or 4 times as much tickets in a day or in an afternoon without taking a break, because now it's just one prompt away, right? It's like, okay, just maybe one more or like, and I think just like when you start, it's still very good also to pause and to reflect and to take this time to learn, right? I think I've seen it myself, like it's easy to skim through the agent response and just take the bit that interests you and you skip that learning. And I think that's where, especially for junior folks and also for managers alike, we need to keep making space for people to absorb this breadth of information, right? This experience. But it is very exciting that they are able to browse through much wider set of experience, to be exposed to a bigger set of things. But I would just also like to want to remind people maybe watching, like just be mindful about not overdoing it too fast, right? I see so many people just like getting caught into this like dopamine train with the agents. So just like absorb and experiment and learn, but also give yourself time to absorb it over like a longer period of time, not just rush through it.
How often do you think developers, even senior ones, feel like they have permission to take a break and learn right now? Because like there's this real feeling right now that everyone is more productive than me. The headlines for 3 years have been saying 44% more increased productivity. And while a lot of these companies promise these great numbers, they're not actually finding, like they're getting obsessive in the cycle of feedback from AI, and they're also not getting these productivity returns. So what do you tell them?
So for me, I think first, like one thing is about like recognizing that like, yeah, like the loudest people are not necessarily the people that like actually are like owning the most business outcomes, right? But it's also, I think like I really want to emphasize that it's also a responsibility of us, like maybe managers or people that have a bit more expertise in the field to recognize or to make that time for people to also learn, right? Like if, as you said, like if people are just like bombarded with projects and things to do and they're just like using these tools to go faster and faster, I think it's about really our more like senior leaders' responsibility to also carve out that time. And the second one, I think, is also to share about kind of like let's say the second face of the coin, or like this other side of the coin, sorry, about kind of like this more like just being trapped in this loop that I was talking earlier. As long as you recognize it and then you help people just like acknowledge it. And then for me, I think it's going back to really the beginning of this conversation. Again, you're going back to outcomes. I don't care how many pull requests or how many lines you wrote. If anything, we know that sometimes the more code is actually a worse outcome, right? So it's really about reminding these fundamentals to people, and that like we are not here to count like how many things you're churning, how many you're really here to see what you can drive. And I think for me, it's a big job of like of managers to really try to help reassure folks that like this is what matters in the end of the day, and also their craft matters, right? Like I think one thing that I'm very also like worried about, or like I tell people working with me is like, we don't want you to really lose your craft, or like just like delegate your thinking, right? Like the judgment, everything still needs to be there, right? So I think for me this is still also fundamental, and I think the burden is still more on managers, and of course like for people that are also maybe in the industry to recognize these patterns and to try to find the escape hatch when they can.
There's
I wanna
also the culture. Sorry, go ahead, Shalini.
I was just going to add, I think it has actually made engineers realize to be more self-regulating. To your question, Jennifer, around like, when do we take a pause? It's so easy to get trapped into this, have the agent work through the night while you're sleeping and give the tasks. And well, that's all extra work for the engineer as well. But being self-regulatory around what is the outcome and the business or system or customer impact that you're making, and being self-regulatory around it, because the agents can work, the computer can work 24/7, but as humans, we need to be more mindful about that. And as managers and as leaders, we need to create that space and talk about it openly, so that people can feel that they have the permission to take a pause.
I think it's all kind of summed up in engineering culture in most cases, right? Like you need to have the culture that allows for the exploration of new things, the ideas, the sharing, like if you have communities of practice, like whatever outcome or mechanism you have within your organization to do that. And Jeremy mentioned this a little bit as well. I think seniors have a big responsibility here to not just create that space, but to model it too. I think that they also need to be able to publicly show this time is blocked off. I'm reading up on the latest developments and everything else. I want to find new opportunities. I want to stay sharp. And I think that there's a cultural element to it that's really important to be able to make sure that you share these things, you share the learnings that's both good and bad, right? Because right now, I think to your point earlier, Jennifer, like a lot of this is FOMO, and this is the typical social media. We're getting the highlight reels for everybody. Like, I talk to probably 4 Fortune 500 companies every day, nonstop. Nobody is seeing those like 5x boosts in productivity, right? Like you're seeing it in that kind of like maybe 30% across the board type of thing. And I think that that's where like we also as an industry maybe need to slow our roll a little bit and say, look, guys, we're still figuring a lot of this out. Sure, I can write boilerplate code as fast as any, but like that's not how I solve problems, right? I have to deal with a messy code base and, inconsistent, things applied across these different microservices, like all that kind of stuff. Like that's the wrangling that happens. And so the learning also comes from like having a senior engineer show up and be like, look, let's sit at this together, right? Let's sit down together. You and me, we're going to go through the code base and we're going to just ask it, like, why is it doing this? Let's follow this function call. Let's see what happens here. That's part of mentoring juniors, but that's also part of how you learn how a code base works, right? Like you have to do all the fundamental steps. And I think that that's realizing that that's part of the job, right? It's not cranking out lines of code. It's sitting there, ingesting it, understanding the reasoning, making sure other people can follow it too, right? Like one of the things I saw, one of the best engineers I've ever seen in my life, his commits often were just like adding extra code or extra documentation to the repository. Like it wasn't cleaning any of it up. It was making it easier for the next person to pick up the thread where he left off, to make it not as hard. So I think that that's the kind of patterns we need to follow or fall back on, really, because that's always been the case.
Okay, that is true, but most job descriptions are what people are, evaluated against in their stupidly annual evaluation. And as Sarah asked from the audience, how are you thinking about compensation and paths to promotion in this new world of AI? If everyone moves up faster, I don't suspect, like you said, Shalini, that the floor is raised to start. I don't suspect in this current economic climate that translates to people are going to move up faster. It actually feels like it's the opposite. It's slowing down. People are not jumping from company to company in tech for once, and they're not for each role moving up 20K a year or every 6 months or something. So how do engineering managers and whole HR departments need to rethink compensation and this hierarchy we've been working on?
So I think the promotion part of it is, you're totally right. It's not like because the floor is rising, the promotion rate also rises. It's not, because I think at the end of the day, from an HR standpoint, or even just as leaders and managers, you are promoting somebody who is operating at that next level already, and defining what does that next level looks like is going to be interesting as we start thinking more about the outcomes and looking at that outcome and ownership. And do you have the product and customer understanding, is like what Phil mentioned earlier around domain expertise. And as from a junior to a senior person, your promotion readiness may also be dependent on how much expertise do you have, not only on the technical side, but also the domain side. And if you're a systems engineer, it's the same thing, how much domain expertise you have for that system on the platform side as well. And that is going to be an additional way. It's not like it was not there, but this becomes more and more important now in terms of like the outcome ownership, the technical judgment you have. Do you have the systems thinking to think beyond the problem that you're solving and actually helping beyond the team that you're working on as you're moving to the next level? Some of those were already part of the evaluation process, but I can imagine like going from like a very junior person to say the next level where you're not senior, but like software 1 to software 2. It was more about execution. Now it's going to be about execution and judgment.
How's that measurable then? How can the average engineering manager who has to report to HR or advise HR, maybe HR is doing this measurements, going to change that?
It has to then tie to your outcomes, whether it is business or system outcomes to a certain extent, and talk about it's not just the lines of code, but the judgment that you have made to ensure that the business outcome is there. And that business outcome can be in various different facets, whether it is revenue or engagement or performance, depending on which lines of areas that you're working on.
Could that risk experimentalism? Could that risk experimentation? Because if it is a hypothesis that fails, like AI is supposed to help us prototype and make experiments more, but if that's not driving a business outcome, is that still success if you learn it didn't?
Totally. I think, and that's where the secondary metrics comes along, and would love to hear from Phil and Jeremy too. It's like, how many times were you able to experiment hypothesis? It's like, instead of 1, were you able to do 5 more, or whatever that X number could be, so that yes, maybe the business outcome is not there, but were there enough hypotheses that were tested in the ecosystem for you to move forward? Because yes, maybe quarter over, just looking at 1 quarter, maybe it's not enough, but you've had enough hypotheses invalidated. Maybe the following quarter, you will find that impact that you were looking to do.
Okay.
I think there's 2 components to it as well. I think Shalini already hit on it pretty well, but I think the other one is worth saying, like, do you make other people better around you? I think is one things that I think is really important when you evaluate an engineer. And this can be like, it's different for each role, right? Like a senior engineer obviously has the ability to mentor individually the juniors, but there's also just did you clean this up? Did you make this process better documented? Did you leave it better than when you found it, type of thing? And I think that that's also a piece where the experimentation is partly a risk on your own part, like how much experimentation and new things you're going to try. Like yes, if you're going to take that into your performance cycle, you might hit, you might not. Like that's a risk you have to take. But being known as someone who takes consider like well balanced and well thought out risks in that sense, right? Tries new things, sees that that's happening. It in and of itself is valuable. It's also incredibly valuable if you make that something that turns into or institutional knowledge, right? Like there's a section of the backlog that we've explored, but we've never really tried against. Well, if you create a hypothesis and invalidate it, because that's not something you guys can do as an organization, that's incredibly valuable because now that's one less thing that everybody needs to consider on a quarterly basis. So there's a way to get value from a negative result in that sense. And I think that's also where you have to like make sure that you own it and understand like, why am I doing this? Am I learning something? Is the organization trying to determine something? Not all experiments have a positive result in the form of new product / new revenue, right? Like some of it can just be as simple as, hey, I created a bootstrap version or a pre-built GitLab or GitHub repository to make it just that little bit easier for people to spin up a microservices that adheres to our standards or whatnot, right? Like there's so many different ways you can do this that I think it's hard to list them all out, but under the heading of like, have you made everybody else's life just a little bit easier is just an easier way to think about it. And it's like, that's how you get promoted because you are a asset to the team and the company in a way that people want to be around you.
But you have to learn to be able to speak about that glue work, people, because specifically women and people from minoritized groups have always been doing that glue work and not getting promoted because that wasn't part of their job description, famously.
Yeah, that's part of it. You have to be your own cheerleader. I think it's important. I think one of the best management principles ever is like both the direct report and their manager has to have a different version of the brag book for that person, right? Write down all their accomplishments, keep track. And then when you get to your quarterly or yearly reviews, you both have a version of it and you want to check and sync it with each other, obviously, but don't make that a like surprise to everybody. Like, hey, I did these 18 things this year. Like everybody should have heard of it and then, right? And I think that's also part of the culture thing, right? You have to celebrate your engineers. Not all of it's going to be, here's a pay raise celebration. Some of it's also just this person did something really incredible. Let's showcase them. That's valuable enough because it's a good way to reinforce that lifting each other up.
Celebrate learning, not necessarily success, and amplifying learning. Jeremy?
Yeah, I like what you said also about this like achievement document. I actually encourage even like everybody in my team to actually build also their own version because I'm sure I'm always missing something. And I really like what you both said about, let's say, like getting this, like, let's say, this promotion, like, or like the path to promotion or the path to let's say, show like seniority. I think the last angle that I really also think is very important, and I think that's where also managers can really see it, is also how you've been basically like building these outcomes or how using these technologies, right? So have you shipped like small iterable changes safe to production? Like have you like made a plan, like a rollout plan? I mean, all these things like kind of like the best practices of engineering. Is it like something that you do on a regular basis, and then that's really like, is your work like really, let's say, smooth? Even as you said, like I like what you said, Phil, about enabling others, but it's also about making sure that it's easy for others to basically work with you, right? Like if there are like this small targeted change that people are able to review, ship fast, everybody understands what you do. I think that also makes you much more efficient and much more likely to be promoted if you're like an engine for the company as well, right? Like somebody that also maybe even defines new processes or like finds ways, oh, the way we've been doing this is like really inefficient. What about this? And then you get time to drive it and to change it. And this is where like really like a lot of people, especially now with all these new tools, can really show a lot of impact in organizations.
And talking to customers or other departments, I think more than ever bridging those gaps, but finding a way to spend time with customers or customer support or anybody that's a domain expert is very valuable as well. I mean, we're just touching, like breaking the very surface of this topic. And I think we've got several conversations to go, and we need people to go deep in depth and really think about how you are psychologically safety, because we didn't mention that, but all these things we talked about today are only possible if you have a psychologically safe, iterative environment that encourages learning. So I wish that for everyone. As we're winding down, I did just see Margarita shared a question in Slack, or in the chat here. So I'm just going to tease it now. So hopefully people will go to the Slack, whether they're joining now or viewing. And the question is, the discussion today leans toward engineers becoming more of product engineers, evaluated not just on technical skills, but also on domain knowledge and customer problem understanding. That's what they always should have done. That's how they get promoted. Why do you think we see a lot of movement in the opposite direction, where companies are shifting coding with AI to PMs, not engineers, responsibilities, and laying off engineers because AI can now assist with writing code and making system decisions? Are they just confused and lost between vibe coding and engineering? So I will check y'all on the Slack and we will continue the conversation there. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day and good luck all.